Hey everybody, welcome to the Bows, Bros, and Bucks podcast. My name is Kyle, and I'm your host for this awesome podcast that we're doing. Sorry it's been so long since we've done one of these. The season was absolutely crazy, and I decided that I was going to forgo that just for the season and do it as an off-season content producer. So this podcast isn't something that was the main focus, but we're going to continue to do it occasionally. I've been sick the last week or two, so I haven't posted a video in a while, but we will get into today's topic. So the topic for today is my top 10 deer mistakes that I made this season. Starting with the first one, it's a pretty simple thing, but I don't think a lot of us thought about it, is I started to use a couple cell cameras this year. I only run about 5 trail cameras, and 3 of them were cell cameras this year. And on my Tacticam, you can request HD videos, and you pay basically $5 to get 50 of them. And I didn't know that when you get the actual SD card out of it in person, you can get those videos for free. So you don't necessarily need to request those videos unless you need to see different angles of a buck. Just don't waste your time requesting those. So that's a pretty simple thing. And one of the biggest things going from early season to late season was bug-proof clothing. You obviously want to wear something that's light and you're not sweating to death in the early season. But what I noticed during the opener in Maine on the islands was the mosquitoes were horrific. And I was getting bitten alive. I think I counted like 56 bug bites. So for me, I needed to wear something a little bit thicker so they couldn't bite through it. So that's just something that you can keep in mind. The next one is not following your gut and overhiking. Sometimes I didn't follow my gut, and that was the reason why I missed an opportunity at a really nice buck. I decided to pull in the parking lot of where I was going to go, and then I decided to go to a different spot last minute, and because of that the buck showed up in front of my tree where I was going to be. So I would have got him that day, but that's totally fine because the season worked out amazing with 6 bucks. But there's obviously different things that we can look at and see that we messed up on or could have done different. And the overhiking part is just in turn to gun hunting. I was a little bit aggressive and tried to stalk on dry land a lot and overhike, and because of that I went outside my comfort zone and kind of bumped a lot more deer than I should have. And I don't mind doing that, but I just wasn't hunting the way that I should have been. I should have been sticking to my strengths where I was hunting. And then the next one is this year in New Hampshire, relying on old spots was something that was super crucial, but I made the mistake of going to places in New Hampshire. I had seen deer before and there just wasn't deer this year because of the increase and decrease of the food that was needed. So we had a lot of acorns, so the deer were more spread out, more than ever before that I had noticed, and they were traveling to places where I had never seen deer before. So they were in different places, and whether that was the lack or the abundance, it just seemed like they were in spots that I hadn't hunted before, and the places that I had dried up since I got back from college due to hunting pressure and other different things. And also the increase in water this year took away a lot of the bedding in some of the swamps that I hunted. Bucks don't really care about water, but when it overlaps the islands that they're on, it definitely affects that. One of my spots that produced 12 bucks on camera last year, this year it got logged, and due to that I just absolutely had that spot ruined. I had a trail camera in there almost all year and only had 1 buck on it, and then a tiny buck come through, but they just were not in there like they used to be. So realizing what logging or clear cutting can affect in the current time, it will probably be good in a couple of years, but as of now, the bucks have all moved out of there because they lost their security cover. So I made that mistake of trying to keep hunting a spot where there just wasn't bucks, and you need to focus on where there is big bucks and move to where they are. And I feel like I did that better this year than most years, but you definitely need to be in the game. Overthinking when your cell cameras or trail cameras aren't going off. I spend a lot of time looking at data of trail cameras and just understanding like when I should go to an area, when there's been previous data from an area. And I think that's something that when I see that a camera's not going off, that kind of messes with my mind. But I had multiple times this season when I went to go check a trail camera and I spooked a buck or I spooked a doe. And that just showed me that there's deer in those places, even if the camera's not going off. They might be skirting it or going just 5 yards behind it. So that's something that I definitely paid attention to this year, is not to base all of your decisions off of that. So pivoting from different spots because of those issues or developments, you just have to have more and more spots because places will dry up or not be that good. The next biggest mistake that I made was putting pressure on yourself to kill a buck. I went through a period where I just was putting a lot of pressure and just wanted to kill one so bad that I was almost willing it to happen. And that's sometimes when the worst things happen, when you make mistakes, when you forget to do things in a climber or a saddle and you forget equipment. One of the biggest mistakes I made for self-filming this year was buying a camera that was absolutely amazing. The quality was perfect, but it did not do very well on movement. And it's a manual zoom, which I'm not used to because it's a real camera. So because of that, I couldn't do it with one hand, with the other hand in my bow, like a digital zoom, like on the top, like my old handy cam. So all my other films, like it's easy to like swing the camera and just get it on film, but with this one you had to like turn the lens, and sometimes for the buck that I injured this year, you could see the buck coming in, but then the camera, I brought the big lens, so you can't zoom out past a certain distance, so it's zoomed in super far. So that was one of the biggest mistakes. And my secondary angles with my GoPro, my batteries were always dying. I need to buy like a battery pack to plug into those that I've bought since. But having constant battery connection to be able to film is something that's super important, to do that secondary angle from a film perspective, which for me is really annoying because I just love to hunt and filming is not my #1 priority, but I'm going to try to do better for my viewers and for myself, just to try to be better at that. Finding a balance of life and hunting, that was something that I didn't really do a good job at this year. Obviously I don't have a family of my own, but I relied on my summer sales job to get me through this hunting season, so I didn't have to work during it. But I definitely could have been doing other stuff when I wasn't hunting if I could kind of find a part-time job or something. So that was something that I definitely could have been better at, and it's important to go over things that we didn't do the best during the season so we can try to improve, and then also look at the positives. And that's just like anything in life. We set goals and we try to fulfill them, and then we look back to see how we can grow. So I went to church, but I wasn't really engrossed because I kept thinking about hunting. So now I'm kind of back on track, but that was definitely something that I could have been better at. Biggest improvements this year. So saddle hunting was a big improvement, something that I hadn't done before. Hunt Light was a huge, gave me a huge opportunity to use their saddle this season, and I'm not much of a promoter of companies. I don't like to have the basis of my company or my content based around a company. That's just not who I am. So AJ, the owner of that company, is super nice. He's like, you don't have to post us all the time, just try to use our stuff. And that was really nice of him to give me that opportunity to use their stuff and post about it occasionally, but not mandatory like some companies. And with that, I bought a bow retriever, and it's from a company called Allen. and you can get it at any Walmart. I think it's like 20 bucks, but the bow retriever, so you don't have to use a bow rope or a string. It retracts into itself, and it's pretty quiet if you do it manually and slowly. And that was a big time saver. So I could just hook it up to my bow while I'm climbing up in my saddle, or my up in my sticks, or up in the climber. That was a big time saver. It's quiet, and it doesn't leave a scent wick to the ground, because the biggest mistake I see new hunters make is they lift their bow up and then they put the bowstring back down to the ground, and you just left a scent wick from getting 20 feet up high to the ground where the deer can smell you. And most of those people are not washing their backpacks, not washing their ropes throughout the season, if not before the season. So you're just leaving another reason for the deer to be able to bust you. So I definitely did good getting up high. I don't think I sat below 15, 20 feet the whole season. I'm usually 25 feet up there, so I'm not skylining, so the deer can't see me. But you need to leave a good backdrop. So one thing I tried to do is make sure the sun was usually the right angle, because if you have the sun at your back and your shadows going everywhere, the deer can see that. And every movement you make makes a big difference. They can tell, and make sure that you have a good cover. And that's the nice thing about a saddle, is you can be a little bit more hidden in those trees, or like a hemlock or something, if you can get up in sticks, because you can't do that with a climber because it can't have any branches. So that's one of the biggest downfalls. So the saddle definitely made me more versatile to get into trees that I've wanted to but haven't been able to. And then along with that, being aggressive, that was something that I was able to do. I killed 2 deer on the ground this year, and that was just knowing where those deer were based on topography and whether I'd seen them kind of spot and stalk, which I kind of got from my Idaho hunting the last 2 years. And then just being patient, not entering spots unless the conditions are good, whether it's a big change in the weather, big temperature drops, or increase in temperature the day before. Those are the best days to hunt that I've noticed. Obviously, if there's anything over a 5-degree temperature drop, especially in October, it just gets the big bucks moving and all the deer moving. And then the moon phase, I've talked about it a lot, but 3 of my bucks this year were almost on 1 to 2 of the first sits for those deer. And it wasn't like it was luck. Like, I knew what I was doing. I knew that that was the tree I needed to be in. And I did that because I scouted a lot. I even did some sits where I wasn't hunting, but I went up in my climber far away from the tree that I wanted to pick, just so I could see the way that the deer were going past it. So that was like something that I had never done before, is kind of put myself in there before the opening day. And I wouldn't recommend that, but sometimes that scouting from afar to see where they're going, it's no different if you're in like a Midwest environment and you're sitting in your car watching them exit the field to which way they're going. But in New England, I avoided almost all fields, and that put me in the game for getting these deer in daylight. The next one is, let's say, not staying in the same towns. So my town is like, there's some deer and stuff, but there's just not the size that I want. And there's big deer, and a couple big deer in each county, obviously, in each town. But I'm looking for a town that's got the right genetics, that produces multiple big bucks. So I just put myself in the better odds. In this one town that I hunted this year a lot, where I killed the 160 buck that just produced a lot of 120 to 140 plus inch deer. And that was a place that I wanted to focus on, because I wanted to put myself in the best odds and not put myself in a town like mine where a 115, 130 is about as good as it gets. There is bigger deer, but I'm just focusing on those towns that have bigger genetics. And less hunting pressure. That's one of the biggest things, because there's tree stands everywhere here. So putting myself in high probable odds for a big buck was definitely one of the best things that I did this season. And having multiple target bucks is a huge thing, because it's really, really hard to hunt a specific deer, especially in New England, because they are so unpredictable. But the more and more targets you have, the better, because if you just focus on a couple deer, you might as well give up, because generally you're not going to get it done on those. I was lucky enough to do that this year for most of the bucks that I wanted to shoot, except for like 2 that I didn't get. But there was a lot of other bucks that like I've chased in the past, or this year even, that I didn't get a crack at, or I messed up on, or you bump him once and then he's gone for the rest of the season to another place. So those are just different things that you kind of get a couple chances, and then sometimes they're just gone, so you got to make the most of them. And if you have backup bucks, then it's kind of not like a big deal. It's like, okay, there's other bucks I can hunt, but that comes along with scouting. I didn't scout much in New Hampshire, so that was why I didn't do as well size-wise, because a lot of it was most recent intel. And that's one of the coolest things about hunting, is sometimes you don't need to scout. You can just go off that most recent intel, but it's going to take more hunts, and it's going to take more time to get on those bucks, because it just takes longer to find out where their core areas are. But deer don't just bed in one spot, and that's a big misconception, is like there's different buck bedding areas, and they'll bed in places sometimes you'll never think about it. But there is going to be those spots where you'll find a bed and you're like, well, there's no way to hunt this, and that's why he's there. It's because there's no perfect way. I've always hunted this way, but especially this year, hunting when the wind is right for the buck and not for you, not paying attention to the wind as much. I pay attention to what it is, but not it doesn't determine whether I'm going to hunt an area or not. That's one of the things that I focused on in 2020 that made me successful, and out in Idaho and then here as well. And then the next one is continue to call only when necessary. So calling deer, rattling. I really, in New England, don't have much success calling unless I'm in the big woods, or I'm physically on the ground making other noise. And I think the main reason for that is there's a lot of other people that do it. I called in, gosh, probably 10 or 11 bucks this year just using my mouth. And that's the way that I call. I don't use a grunt call unless I'm like tracking or something and I need it. But it's just one less thing for me to need, because I've practiced enough using my mouth that I can be able to do it, and I feel like it's more authentic coming from your actual vocal cords. But that's obviously something that takes practice. You need to try it out and see if it works for you. But I killed a buck in 2020 doing that. Like my first biggest Massachusetts buck, and then this year it worked for quite a few smaller bucks. But the bigger ones, sometimes it's either they love to fight or they're the pretty boys that just are big and like to sit back and be away from deer, because one of the biggest reasons for antler growth besides genetics and food is social stress. They can't have that if they want to grow a good rack. And a lot of the bigger bucks that I've seen like to be isolated from other deer at certain times of the year, and that's just something I've noticed. And sometimes when someone kills like a giant buck, it might be rutting and it might be aggressive, but it's usually by itself. And that's the way that they are. But then I know a guy an hour north in New Hampshire that kills one rattling every single year in the big woods. But he's playing off of saddles and topography and calling from these big ridges that he knows they'll come to scent check and come to J-hook him, and then he just shoots them with a rifle. But obviously your situation's different. It works for some people. Just for me, I just use it usually when I see a deer. I don't cold call a lot, but I occasionally do it like right at sunset, right at sunrise, and if I hear something, maybe I'll do it, but I don't try to overcall. I think that's a big mistake I used to make, was overcalling. And focusing on overlooked areas for bedding, and not just focusing on summer ranges. Like I said, I don't hunt fields ever because that's not where the deer are going to be during the season, unless you have like a private land spot where the deer find daylighting in a field. That's just not where they are in New England. They're back in the bedding areas, and it's not necessarily a thick area, but it's on the edge of the thick area. So a lot of the suburban deer that I hunted, what they'll do is they'll sit on the edge of these neighborhoods, and they'll maybe be up on a cliff, and they'll be looking down at a neighborhood. So if the wind is at their back, they can smell behind them, and then they can look over a hiking trail or over this neighborhood. So if some kids come running back into the woods playing, they can see them and then just skirt out the back, or they can run down to the neighborhood to be safe if pressure comes from behind. And that's hunting pressure, that's people, that's animals, all sorts of things can cause them to do that. But they're going to be in places where they're safe. They're not dumb if they're 4, 5, 6 years old. And the one that I hunted, the 8-year-old, that one, he wasn't dumb. Like, he knew where he was safe, and he knew where he hadn't been hunted. And that's where you just have to find those areas where they're going to be in daylight. And that just comes along with scouting, and knowing what to look for. And we'll go in more depth about how to scout in future videos with some different guests and kind of what they do. But this is just a short podcast talking about kind of the things that I could have done better and some of the things that I felt like I improved on. And I really appreciate you guys listening to this little podcast while I'm sick. And have a good rest of your off season. We're going to get into these turkeys real soon. It'll be coming up fast in a month or two. So take care.